Hello and welcome along to our second EFL Manager special of the day. And just a few minutes after we finished recording the Preston one, Charlie, we had an almighty shock, or I should say a slight surprise down in League Two. Not perhaps at what's happened, but so much the timing of it, because Tranmere Rovers this morning have parted company with Keith Hill just days before the League Two playoff campaign starts. However, there are a few extenuating circumstances which we've got to talk about behind the scenes. But Charlie, before we do that, just your initial reaction, because there's a bit of clash between on the pitch performance and off the pitch situations.
Yeah, it's hard to balance it because for me, there was people who were very much, not anti-Keith Hill, but were a bit sceptical when he first sort of took over. And I think that he's never quite recovered from that with some fans, where regardless of what happened on the pitch. What I would say is this could be both a stroke of genius or implosion. And the reason that could be a stroke of genius is potentially that new manager bounce. If you're ever going to get one, a playoff semi-finals is possibly where you'd want it, So on that basis, I was shocked. I wasn't shocked. I didn't see him after the reaction he'd been getting from the fans and performances of late, which really they've sort of started their way into the playoffs. Considering that he had a good start with them, they have started there. I was not shocked that he was being sacked because I didn't think he'd be there come August, September time. I was shocked that he was done a matter of days before the playoff semi-finals, if I'm being brutally honest. So like you say, to echo what you said, timing over the actual sacking itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing is that I think it was even alluded to by Mark Palios in the statement this morning, which is the fact that despite success on the pitch, we're having to do this. I think that was the key line here, wasn't it? They obviously reached the EFL Trophy final. They've secured a place in the playoffs. His win rate over his time there is actually still around the 50% mark. But as you mentioned, it's sort of dwindled a bit. The last 13 games, they've only won 3 of them. And that left them scraping into the playoffs in the end. I think it's fair to say that based on the pitch performance alone, he wouldn't have been sacked. But given the fact that he's been probably in the last 2 or 3 months at constant loggerhead with the fans, who, for all of Tranmere and whether we think they were right to be against him in some sections to start with, are a dedicated fan base and have built a reputation as being a community club with the chairman, with the board, with the players, with the staff. It probably wasn't ever going to end well from Keith Hill's part on that front, was it?
No. I think of all the clubs in the EFL, probably similar to yourself with Luton and stuff like that, you really need the fans on board because you're talking about a team that has been through a lot, been in the days in the National League and still had massive attendances in the same. I'm only using those as an example, but those clubs have always been well supported. So you need to get them on side and you do that through the way you talk to them, the way you address them, and also the football that you play. And I don't think he's necessarily garnered himself with much appreciation from them. The thing is, they have got one of the better squads in the league. So you do wonder anyone who came in after Mike Jackson, probably with a little bit of experience, probably could have got a bit more out of that squad. I do question a tiny bit about the recruitment. I know I've spoken about it before. Sometimes a bit with like Paul Mullin, for example. Obviously he's been flying at Cambridge. I was amazed that he was sold. I know that wasn't Keith Hill's decision, but there has been a bit of an aging squad that's sort of building up there. So I think it's a culmination of that and just the fact that I think he never really ingratiated himself to the fans, possibly the way he spoke about the club and also the way that he played football, unfortunately.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I guess we do have to talk about the positive of this. You mentioned it might be a stroke of genius. Yes, Keith Hill is a man who has won promotion from League Two multiple times, but the man taking over for the playoffs is Ian Dawes. Now, he had a caretaker stint earlier in the season, as you mentioned, after Mike Jackson left the club. He managed 5 games, 3 of them in League Two, and he won all of them. He's got a 100% record. Now, the irony of all of this is that Ian Dawes took charge for that caretaker stint after Mike Jackson lost to Morecambe. Now, Tranmere's game in the playoffs is against Morecambe in the semi-final. So, putting all the pieces together, you said it could be either. Do you think this potentially is the stroke of genius, though?
Well, possibly. I mean, they've got Andy Parkinson as well in and helping out, who's obviously a legend of the club. And I think it's enough. It might be enough just to carry them over in terms of motivating the players, the enthusiasm that someone like that can generate. And if you have got that win record, it can't be sniffed at. I can see why the club went for Keith Hill. I wanted to really quickly address that. I can see why. However, if you want a short, sharp sort of shock, then you do need people who know the club, who've been around there and are ingrained in what the club does. And I think really those two I suppose it's a little bit of a win-win, really. If they don't get through the playoffs, obviously I'd like to think they do because I think I backed them too on our prediction show. But if they don't get through the playoffs, then you could sort of blame the fact it was Keith Hill, a bit of a mess around, unfortunately, last minute sort of stuff. But if they do, it's an absolute bonus, isn't it? Especially for the 2 lads who've taken over. So I think they've been quite clever in the way they've done this, and it's a bit of a they've got nothing to lose in that sense. But I think it might just give them the boost they need.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, from the board point of view, the fans have been asking for Keith Hillshead in the majority, so they can point to that if they don't then succeed in the playoffs, which is, this is what you asked for. So I guess from Mark and Nicola Palios' point of view, it's a no lose situation. From the club's point of view, they've got a man in charge now who's won every game and managed the club at some point this season. Now, for the players looking ahead to the playoff games and on the pitch again, that's got to be a benefit, hasn't it? Because they're going to know exactly what he wants from them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think, even at grassroots football we play, when someone new comes in, you're always trying to work out, does he, for argument's sake, play 3-5-2? Does he want me to bomb on? Does he want this, that, and the other? And I don't think that's up for debate, like you say. So I think it's familiarity, but enough that I think that given the magnitude of the game, I mean, you have to sort of say, probably as a professional footballer, you should be able to motivate yourself for that. But I think this, whatever worked last time, they're in a different position to where they were last time. I know that Mike Jackson had obviously whatever had happened there, but there was a bit more prospect. It really does feel like there's a bit of a cloud at the minute. So he's got a lot of work to do. So I did want to caveat that, but he might be just the man to get him over for the next few games.
And I guess looking at the other side of that on the pitch now, we've got to look ahead potentially to the playoffs before we look ahead to what might happen long term with the Tranmere manager. They're coming up against a Morecambe side who flew into fourth place at the end of the season. They've won 5 of the last 6. They've got a very well noted, experienced squad. Do you think that this managerial change is going to be enough to help Tranmere go against the informed side in those playoff places?
I don't know. It's heart against head on this. Obviously, I just think out of all the teams they were going to play, Morecambe is probably not the one you wanted. Like you say, in red hot form at the minute. And although, yes, you might be able to make a bit of a change, you are talking about a club, like you say, 3 wins in 13. That's a tremendous slump. To rectify that in a few days is going to be tough. I think you'd rather a team that's been in a bit more patchy form in the playoffs. So my head is saying, unfortunately, not. And it's a real shame because I think the club, deserves to be in League One in terms of the stature and the magnitude and all of that of them. But they've been great to us. I just think they've probably got the one team in that 4 teams in the playoff that you probably didn't want, to be honest.
I guess the only other thing we've got to factor in is, given when it is and what's been announced in the last few days nationally, we could see fans. And given the fact it's a new manager, given the fact it's someone who the club are completely behind and the fans are completely behind, does that potentially make a difference even for the first leg at home?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I will say that. I mean, we've been to, I'm not plugging vlogs every time we talk about Tranmere, but obviously we've been to a few of their games, and they do that. You can almost, I remember at Watford, it was almost like they were breathing in that third goal, from the penalty. You could almost just, it sounds odd, but you could just almost feel that ball being sucked into the net by the fans alone, let alone whatever happened. So I think for me, they are a huge, huge part of that club and a huge part of the success of that club. And in that first leg, if they can get fans in, they could sneak a draw even or something like that, and then that gives you a good foundation to go to the second leg with.
Absolutely. And I guess we've talked about the playoffs a little bit. So you maybe think that Morecambe are going to edge past, but we've got to look ahead to the summer. So based on what you think happens in the playoffs, will Ian Dawes be in charge, or will we see a new face in the summer? And if so, who are you looking at? Because there's going to be plenty of names to choose from, aren't there?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think I get the impression with Nicola and Mark Palios, it's an investment. I mean, Mickey Mellon, you see how long he was there for. It's not a. I don't think they'd have done this decision flippantly. Sorry, I think it would have been heavily thought out, and so I would like to think they were organised enough. They've probably got someone else in charge. As great as it is having a caretaker for a few games, as we've mentioned quite a few times, there's a huge difference between the two, and you probably want someone. And this is ironic because obviously I would say that Keith Hill was that. I just think that they probably need someone with a lot more experience than probably what a short-term fix like this is going to sort out. And I think they've recruited quite well like that. They've always gone for people who play a certain brand of football and are quite exciting to be around the club. So I think they'll probably do the same again. I can't see this being the long-term option.
Fair enough. I mean, I will say he's just about favourite for the job at the moment. After that, there's some interesting names in there. The likes of John McGreal is second, but then Richie Wellens, Robbie Fowler, Derek Adams and Ian Holloway. I mean, and even going down to Kenny Jackett at 12s to 1s. There's a few interesting names in there. And it just sort of shows the plethora of different styles of manager that are going to be available, doesn't it?
Mm. Oh, absolutely. And I mean, Tranmere is an attractive club to any manager. You wouldn't have to sell the club necessarily to a manager. If anything, you could almost argue they'd be trying to impress the club because it's I want to say sleeping giant. That's a cliche, isn't it? Got a huge fan base, well supported, very successful sort of community work and all of that kind of thing as well. Do huge amounts for that. So who wouldn't want to work in that kind of environment? It's just getting those results on the pitch. And I suppose there's some big names there that I think they would have a fair pick of anyone they wanted out of that sort of list, if not beyond that as well. Because you don't know who's going to go over the summer. I'm sure there's going to be more casualties as the summer progresses from teams maybe higher up in the leagues and stuff like that. So you could even nick a lower down championship manager or something like that as a way of building the club up, and that's where they want to be, really. Go.
The final question I have to ask you as confirmation, and then I will be fair and do the same as well. Do you think Tranmere will go up via the playoffs, which I think you've made clear? And who do you think the next manager will be?
If they get through Morecambe, they'll win it. I think, and I know it sounds a bit of an odd thing because obviously it's a 50% chance if they do get through, but just if they can turn over Morecambe, I honestly think then you've got to start thinking your name's written on it. In terms of that, I can't, because I don't think they'll get past Morecambe. I think there'll be an announcement, fairly early on into the summer. I think the Palios again, they're very sensible. I think they would like to give the manager as long as he can to build that squad over the summer, whatever it is that they want to do. I would say they probably do. They could do a bit of a freshness up front. I think they're looking a bit leggy in that part of the field. So for me, that's sort of come out in the lack of goals recently. So for me, I think, unfortunately, to sum it all up, they probably won't get past Morecambe. And I think there'll be a manager change fairly on in the summer.
I'm going to actually go the opposite of you. I thought long and hard about this for the last half an hour, and I'm going to back Ian Dawes to take them up. I don't know that he'll keep his 100% record because I'm not sure they'll win both legs against Morecambe, but if anyone's going to do it, it's going to be them. I'm going to opt for the side of stroke of genius. I guess the difficulty is if they face Newport in the final. I mean, whoever they face in the final, really, there's history. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But of course, I'm pretty sure there'll be a new manager in the summer as well. But I think it will be Ian Dawes after a promotion. And there's where we're different this time. But if you did enjoy this episode, please do chuck a thumbs up on it. If you're a Tranmere fan, of course, let us know down in the comments what you think is going to happen in the playoffs. Are you happy to see the back of Keith Hill? And what do you think is going to happen for next season and beyond? Who's going to be in charge come the start of next campaign? If you haven't already, subscribe down below for regular content from the podcast. Thank you to Charlie for joining me as always. You can follow us on Twitter at HonestFootball3. And hopefully we'll see you next time.